Well, hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Carrie Arnold, and I am the Program Director for Evidence-Based Coaching here at Fielding Graduate University. Today is April 13, 2022. And welcome to this Coaching in Context webinar. We offer this series on a monthly basis to the coaching community. And I'm delighted to have our speaker be Dr. Okakon Udo. Okakon is part of our faculty here at Fielding, and he has made huge contributions to the field of how we educate students in evidence-based coaching. Dr. Okakon has held faculty positions at several different universities. He's held faculty roles at Northwestern Health Sciences. He's held faculty roles at St. Mary's, St. Thomas. He's also been an instructor for coactive training. And we are delighted to have him part of the evidence-based coaching program. He has a PhD in pastoral care. He has a master's degree in process-oriented psychology, and he has his bachelor's degree in divinity from a theological college in northern Nigeria. He is also the founder and CEO of Soul Engineering. And so I am delighted to turn it over to him. Just real quickly on logistics, the session is being recorded and it'll be available on the Fielding website. So if you cannot stay for the whole session, you can certainly access what you've missed later. The session is eligible for an ICF CEU, 0.5 in core competency and 0.5 in resource development. Towards the end of the session, I will put a link to an evaluation. If you could complete that evaluation within 24 to 48 hours, that will prompt us to issue you an ICF CEU, and that will come from the registrar's office at Fielding Graduate University. So, Okakon, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Carrie, for that introduction. I'm delighted to be here with all of you, and without any further delay, I'll pull up my PowerPoint slides. The reason I'm going to do that, typically I prefer not to use slides a whole lot, but I'll be telling you stories, and I have a lot of photographs that will help us as we navigate through the topic that we have for today. And our topic is unmasking, coming home to yourself. So I'll pull that up and we will get started. Okay. So the first slide is this Star Trek greeting. That's a Vulcan greeting, which is, I am pleased to see that we are different. May we together become greater than the sum of all of us. And some of you I know, and some of you I don't know. And I'm hoping that by the end of our presentation time that we would have connected at depths and levels that we did not have when this session started. So I am framing this process, which is my own unmasking process, in different segments. And this part of it is the preparation phase. So exactly 22 years ago, I was minding my own business, pursuing my career and development, raising a family. My kids were young then, when suddenly the phone rang. And I picked up this phone. It was a guy by the name of Dipanka. And Dipanka is an artistic director of a theater in Minneapolis that he and his wife actually developed. And he said, I need to talk to you. I'm like, okay, what is it about? He went straight to the point and said he had a colleague and a friend, who teaches at the New York State University that was putting this play on. And the photo that you have there says, not in my season of songs. And it was Awam Ampa, who is a Nigerian playwright. And he said, I have everybody in my cast, I need one more person. And this role was the role of an African elder Nigerian to be precise, who was Yakubu. I could not talk myself out of it. I could not. He wouldn't let me go. It's like, I think it has your name written all over it. And you need to understand that I had never acted except once or twice in elementary school. So here I was saying yes and making a commitment to something that stretched me more than anything else I had ever done in my life. By the time this show was on, I connected to this character that I played, who was Yakubu. And I discovered that the feelings of Yakubu, the emotions that came through Yakubu, the story that Yakubu told were living inside me. I could scream through my role. I could let the anger and the rage, especially towards colonization and colonialism and the missionary enterprise of Africa that impacted me and my people significantly. I could let it all out. And it felt really good. There was so much release in that experience. And when it was all over with this play, of course I returned to my life again. I did. It was 10 years after that one of my friends, who is also a growth-minded, coach consultant, called me one day and said, I think we should look for what's next for us. So we did, and ended up signing up for the master's degree that Kerry referenced at the Process Work Institute in Portland, Oregon. It was a different kind of master's program. It was all about deep inner work. And to give you a sense for how this was structured, each one of us had 120 hours as part of a master's program for therapy and supervision. So we went deep, we dug in, and I remember this day as if it were yesterday. I was in class, and it felt like there was this volcano that was like coming up within me as if it was going to erupt. And I said to the professor, there is something happening right here, because it was one of those courses where it wasn't about head knowledge only. We were constantly dancing between all domains of our beings. And I said to the professor, do you know how I feel right now? And he said, what? I said, I feel like I want to scream. And the fear that is holding me back from screaming is that if I scream right now, I will not be able to stop. If you can sense into this environment that I'm talking about, it's one of those. And so the professor said to me, so what's holding you back? You have full permission in this space for you to let it out. And I did let it out. And I was told by everyone that I met after that experience that they could hear my scream all across campus. That's how deep, that's how loud, that's how powerful, but that was also how freeing it was for me to finally let it out. Now I had to do the work of doing what, as we called it in our program, unfolding it, to see what the scream was about and why the scream came up in the first place. And that is when I discovered that I had been holding things within me for so long. That although I was born post-colonial era in Nigeria, that the impact of colonization in Nigeria was living in my being. It was living through my people, in my community. I was born into that field. I was also born into the field of this missionary enterprise that declared that all of my people were heathens, people who were living in darkness, and that they were bringing light. So you can see, from the get-go, it was the sense to which the only way you could live right and be right was to do what? Become something other than you were. So that has been my journey from birth. And I had constantly put on one mask after another to be able to cope, to be able to belong, to be able to thrive, to be able to be successful in a system that was designed not by my people, for my people, but by others, for us, that was never culturally sensitive, culturally competent, that never adapted to the needs of who we were as a people. So now what's going to happen after the scream? Something else that was very intriguing about this program that I studied, it was a program in psychology, as you've heard already, was that we had to do a thesis. And in the traditional institutions that I had attended all the way to my doctorate, of course, that meant that you could go the qualitative route or you could go the quantitative route. That was it. But at the Process Work Institute, there was a third option, and it was the creative option. So I was like, I think I'm done already with writing dissertations and thesis, so I'm going to go with the creative option. So I remembered that from age 13, I have been taking photographs. Like right now, I literally have millions of photographs. Some of what you are seeing behind me are just a little, set of what I have, taken over the years. So I said, oh, this is the time for me to finally make something out of all the photographs I have taken. So my creative project was going to be photography. So I went and looked at all my photographs. It did not excite me. It did not move me at all. And I was surprised. And then suddenly came this sense of, what about Yakubu? Remember what happened 22 years ago? Where is Yakubu? Where are you with it? It was uncomfortable because I needed to step away from the getting back to my life to now looking at Yakubu up close and personal. So I remember the day that I said, I am going to investigate and do something with Yakubu. So that became the focus of my inquiry that led to my thesis. In a moment, I'll tell you about the form that thesis took, because it wasn't a traditional thesis. I had to do a contextual essay, to show that I could, think academically and make sense of this whole concept of what I classified and categorized as internalized oppression. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, it just means that long after the oppressor is gone, there lives something in you that continues to impact your life, sometimes for a whole lifetime. And in most cases, it actually does that for generations after generations. So what am I going to do with Yakubu now? I am always grateful for friends, because somebody said, I think you need to talk to a coach named Kristen McHugh. She used to live in San Francisco area about that time. So I'm like, okay, 1 week passed, 2 weeks passed, and this friend ran into me again and said, did you call her? I'm like, I haven't, but I'm going to do it now. So I called Kristen, and she said, sure, I will accompany you. She was going to accompany me not as my academic advisor, but my artistic director and coach. And that is what started what I am calling my hero's journey. It took me 2 full years of screaming, of crying, of grieving, of being in pain, of feeling release, but going deeper and deeper into this whole story, into these masks. And something else about Kristen was that in Chicago, in her undergraduate studies, she studied theater. And she said one day when we met, oh, I remember one of my professors told me about something, and it was this medium called mask. are you open to trying it? I'm like, why not? You know, now I was going to do it because my heart, my body, my spirit were all involved in it. So we got into mask making. We made masks, one after another. We kept making masks. We started with 20 masks and eventually ended up with the 3 that I'm showing you. So the first one that you saw here was McDonald. And McDonald, of course, was this British guy who was a colonel that was the one that was put in charge as the Governor General of Nigeria. So he was the one that was in charge of this brutalizing, marginalizing, conscripting of my people, stripping of people's essence so they could become something other than they were. That was his role. So that was McDonald. And this was the mask that I made that became Yakubu. And when I put this mask on, I felt powerful. I felt like I could take on anything. I felt like I could talk to McDonald. I felt like you haven't read or experienced my one-man show, which I'm going to tell you about in a moment. But in that one-man show, I felt like I could talk to all the people in my life that told me I wasn't good enough, I couldn't do something because they had power and rank and were occupying different roles and positions in my life. I was invincible. With Yakubu, life was finally complete. And so the journey continued. And then this one was the mask that represented myself. It wasn't my pure self. It was the me that was acculturated. So this was my acculturated self. And to help you understand what that meant, it meant that in the years and years of all of what I have told you up to this point, that I had ended up with an identity that was very, very challenging. On the outside, I was as white as you can be. On the inside, I was as black as you can be. And what that meant was that among my white friends and my white tribes and communities, I did not belong because guess what? I was black. And among my black friends and communities and tribes, I did not belong because guess what? I was too white. And so I was always caught in this space of where is home? Who am I? And when I go to bed each night, who am I most connected to? And that sense of home was never, ever fully there. So we were doing the mask. I just told you about that. The next thing that we did was we had to do the monologues. And so behind each of these masks, there were stories that we created. So I had 4 monologues. I had a monologue representing McDonald that I told you about, representing Yakubu, representing me that was acculturated. And then the final one, there wasn't a mask, but there was a monologue. It was the monologue of my unmasked self. So I'm going to tell you about what happened on January 28, 2013 at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at the auditorium of Process Work Institute. That was the moment when my unmasking performance, when my one-man show that was about my internalized oppression was on stage for the entire academic community and anyone in Portland who was interested to witness. And in the monologues that I just told you about, there is a build-up. There is a build-up from this story and history that I told you about of colonization represented by Colonel George Brown MacDonald. There is. And then there is Yakubu. What you didn't know about Yakubu is that Yakubu was a cartographer. He was a map maker. And so Yakubu's preoccupation was in the drawing and redrawing of the map of Nigeria in ways that frustrated the colonizers. And so he spent a lot of time in prison because he was pushing up against what? The boundaries that were set. He could not color within the boundaries. That was Yakubu. And that was the gift that Yakubu brought to me, because it was from Yakubu's experience that I was finally able to unmask. That's Yakubu. That's me. That's the mask. And that is me speaking up. What was I speaking about? Telling the stories of my people. Telling the stories of the freedom that we had, the connection that we had to God as we understood God, that was very different from the God that was brought to us. Talking about the interconnectedness of all things, about how we were custodians of the land and how we knew how to tend the land because we were in relationship with the land. The land was never an object. Telling them about how the community existed, how the circles that gathered all the time were gathering around rituals and practices, rituals that were rituals of transformation and transition. There was a ritual for everything. There was a ritual for shifting from being a young kid to your adolescent years, to young adulthood, to being a married person, to being a leader, to being an elder in the community. There were rituals, and these rituals were located within community life. And then that moment came when I finally took off the mask. It was my final mask. And I can remember as I was on stage that night that it took me about 4 minutes. 4 minutes of struggling whether to do it or not. I want you to think about yourselves right now, to think about times in your life when you have hit what is called your edges, where you were on one of those edges and you went, oh my God, I don't know what is going to happen. Should I go or should I stop? And if you know of this little being called the praying mantis, the praying mantis sits there often and goes like that, forward and backwards, constantly going, do I jump? Do I take another step? Oh no, not yet. And goes back and does that over and over again. That's what I was doing. Why was I doing that? I did not know who I was going to meet on the other side. I knew who I had before then. Those masks had become my friends. And to give you a little comparison to that, I just did a seminar this morning for a group of 18 people on a particular staff, not far from home. It was an in-person session. And 3 people, without rehearsing it, said, our biggest struggle is like, when I come to this office, I become someone else. That's not who I am when I go over there, because my people are over there. And I don't know how to bring that person over here. And one of them said, I even speak differently than I do when I am over there. So that's what we are talking about here, that the masks that we put on, and if you had the opportunity to do one of those unmasking journeys that I will introduce to you momentarily, you would know that every single one of us goes through life putting on masks. That some of us are engaged in this process of constantly asking the question and working hard to bring all dimensions of themselves together. Is it ever mission accomplished for a lifetime? No, it is not. So the unmasking process that I'm telling you is not one that completes the journey. It is unmasked, just like I did, and yet always unmasking. That was the moment that I did what often scares you and I the most, that moment of looking into the mirror, looking into your eyes, taking a moment to not just, comb your hair or brush your hair, but just admire the being that is in front of you. That's what I did. And I'll tell you something right now. It was the first time in my life that I finally came home to me. First time. And since I took that step in 2013, I have been getting reacquainted with myself, falling in love with myself, admiring, appreciating, accepting, celebrating, honoring all of what I have gone through to get to that moment of finally meeting me. So, as often happens, 6 months later, I was sitting at home one day. For those of you who know me or know me closely, you know that I am into everything. Social media, I am there. Facebook, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, you name it. The ones that haven't been created yet, I'm waiting for them. So I'm very involved. So this one day I just posted, hey, anybody wants to host my unmasking, show, I can come out and do it. And by the way, I am committing right now. I'm saying this on Facebook. I don't know what possessed me. I'm committed to traveling around the world to do unmasking for 18 months. That's what I said. And the phone started ringing and people started calling, and I had a schedule filled for travel. It ended up being a 2-year world tour. And I was in the United States, I was in the Netherlands, I was in Germany, I was in the UK, I was in Spain, I was in UAE, I was in Uganda, I was in Switzerland. Like I was in some of these countries 5 times. Because as they were going through the unmasking experience, the question kept coming up. Something I didn't tell you about the show that I did. The structure was that there was a post-show discussion. So it wasn't just come see, go home. So it was like the moment I said the last words, I sat down. I sat down with my coach and director, and we had a conversation with the audience. That became the practice in every show that I did. And the one that happened in Portland, people did not want to go away. 2 hours later, they were still there. Even after I left, the conversation was continuing. And then I started getting messages. The story that you told was my story too. People in the LGBTQIA plus community said you were telling my story. Women, men, young, old, you name it, immigrants, refugees, like different people who had survived war in different countries of the world. It's like you were telling my story. And so the next question was, how can we do our own work? Like we've witnessed you do your work. How can we do our own work? So that was what led me beyond doing the global tour with the show to create a workshop. The first one that I created was called Unmasking Discovery. It was a 2-day workshop to help people do their own internal evaluation, identifying, the blocks and the barriers and all of the things that led them to this point of putting on different masks to survive, to thrive in the world that they were living in. And then we did the discovery. So the photos that you are seeing are masks that people created in their own journeys and in their own stories. So after the discovery was done, the people who had done the discovery said, okay, we get the concepts and we have had the experience. How do we own this experience and have ourselves living in this space where there is a level of mastery? That's what led to the creating of the second workshop. That was a 3-day, that was Unmasking Mastery workshop. So some of the people that went to the show eventually did the discovery and did the mastery, which is why I went to some of these countries, more than 2 or 3 times at the time. So what I am doing here is speaking to a few things as it relates to coaching. And one of the key pieces to this story that I am unfolding right now is the need for, the metaphor is always for the Sherpa to have a Sherpa. The need for the coach to have a coach. The need for the supervisor to have a supervisor. Because without doing your own inner work, without having somebody holding the container for you and supporting you on your journey, you are potentially an accident waiting to happen. And so for those of us who are in this, what I call, transformative, healing, emanating light kinds of work and careers and journeys. And if you ask me who those people are, I would say every human being. So parents, teachers, doctors, lawyers, like everyone is involved in this path. To the extent that we do the inner work, which is what the unmasking is about, we are more connected to ourselves and our beings. From that place, connecting with other human beings, understanding other human beings, supporting other human beings, and helping them do their own work, whether it is their own hero's journey or the coming to reality with who they truly are, becomes that much easier. And so people committed and devoted themselves to looking at themselves and taking off one mask at a time. The masks all look different depending on what their struggles or how people presented in the world and what was getting in their way of seeing themselves for who they were. Something that I didn't mention during my first unmasking on that fateful day in 2013 in Portland, Oregon, was the other piece that was keeping me in that moment, for those 4 minutes, was this sense to which I had befriended these masks. And I wasn't just going to toss them. I wasn't. And so I spent time expressing gratitude, to these masks for keeping me safe, keeping me protected, and bringing me this far. So the mask had served their purpose. The work was completed, but I had to acknowledge that. I had to let them know, like, thank you. Without you, I don't know how I would have been. In fact, I wouldn't have accomplished, achieved, succeeded, or even thrived in the world up to the point that I needed to take the mask on. So it wasn't something that was casual or something that was just another step of, okay, I'm done, you're gone. No. And that was an important part of the journey. So the masks just keep coming. And what I want to do right now, before I free you up to post your questions or ask your questions or do what is often done in the African American church, talk back. I want to give you a moment to go inward for a minute. And here is what I want you to consider. Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror and wondered what would happen if you finally had the courage to take off the mask or masks you've been wearing? Have you? And I'm going to just be quiet and invite you to wonder about it. And if you haven't, will you? And if and when you do, what did you discover? Which masks did you find? So ponder on that for a moment. So in my process, in one of my monologues, my heart felt very full, and the emotions were welling up, and I could feel that I was teary. And I spoke out. I wanted so badly to belong. I wanted to matter. I wanted to be someone. I wanted to be known. I wanted to contribute. But that was a trap. For buried and implied in that desire and longing were seeds of oppression, internalized in the systems that groomed me. So it was buried right in there. And in the last monologue, the words that came were, from where I stand, remember the mask is gone, and there is this sense of feeling like, oh, I can see clearly now, And the man in the with the mask by Michael Jackson was actually the music playing when that was happening. I said the men in uniform on my path, police officers, immigration officials, customs officials, can no longer distract me. The insidious racism that exists in this country and the world will only inspire my resolve to educate, share my story, and create dialogues, host community forums, groups, and deep democratic processes for action and transformation. There was a principal in my life who was from Great Britain that I went to prior to coming to the United States. I was so eager to learn. I knew what was next for me. I wanted to go to graduate school, and he had told me graduate school was not for somebody like you. So here I said, Reverend Alan's voice that once tormented me has been transformed into inspiration and drive for excellence. And just so you know, I've been looking for him, and he's now dead and gone. But I wanted to go and have tea with Alan in Great Britain. That's what my desire was, to ask him to never again say that to another human being. The story and plight of Africa will inform my next work, for it is in its freedom that I will find my ultimate peace and healing. And here was my closing statement. Dear friends, and so the journey continues. So I am pausing, and I want to hear from you in any form that you deem fit or necessary. And I will take this down so we can see each other as we talk. So thanks for holding the space. Questions?
Yeah, Oka Khan, there's a question. And actually, I was sitting in a similar question. Josie is asking, were there times when unmasking something that you repressed would hurt others? If yes, how do you resolve that in yourself?
Great question. Interestingly, I answered a similar question in the session that I was talking about earlier today. One of the commitments that I have is that when messes are made, that I will never leave until it is cleaned up. So when people are hurt, when people feel excluded because of my own action or my words or my choices, that it is not something I stepped over or stepped away from, that I will be, number one, open to understanding how my life impacts other people, but also to how we can clean things up, maintain connection, even in situations of disagreement. So it's not something that I take lightly. So what ended up happening with the monologue with McDonald was that I was actually struck by his humanity. And do you know how that came through? McDonald's could not have kids. And so he and his wife struggled with infertility, and they never ended up having kids. And so there was a crack in his story that helped me to connect to his humanity outside of his oppressive role that he was occupying in Nigeria. Are there other questions? Or follow up if there is a need for it.
This is Peggy. I'd be curious to know, if you, after going through the process of your journey, your hero's journey, has there ever been a time where you felt or you needed to put the mask back on? Did you ever hit a challenge that made you kind of step back and you wanted to put the mask back on?
Every day.
Mm.
Yeah, every day.
So my follow-up question to that is,
Mhm.
what were the steps that helped you through that process of not wanting to put it back on?
The only process that I know is that I am committed to my inner work. So it's not something I do monthly or annually. It's something that I do sometimes more than once a day. So that is how much that matters to me, that I'm constantly doing that. It can be through meditation, through a walk in the park or in nature, but I'm constantly like going inward to deal with the anger, the rage, the frustration, the hurt, the pain that is coming. And I would say it shows up every day. You know, what is happening in Ukraine bugs me a lot. And I have feelings and emotions and words that I need to say to whoever is causing the pain that I'm witnessing. So what do I do with that? I am putting it through the same process. We moved to our current home 3 years ago, you know, and one of the neighbors that we share a backyard with, you know, came across the fence and said, "Oh, welcome to the neighborhood. Oh, the other day they saw somebody over there putting a cover, you know, on the AC, and they thought, you know, this person was, you know, from one of the service companies, you know, coming to fix something there, because it was a Black person, and that was me." So what do I do? How can I live in the community and be a neighbor and stay engaged? I go back to the same inner work. So it's never over, you know, and I can give you 1,000,001 examples of how I get triggered every day, I get worked up every day, but I have to keep doing the work every day so that I don't give in to it or do not, you know, like I was gonna bring Will Smith up, you know, like those moments where you have the tendency to want to slap somebody or shoot somebody or punch somebody shows up in our lives every day. So why don't we do it? That's my own formula for it. Inner work is non-negotiable in my life, because there goes I, but for this possibility of inner work. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Did I answer the second part?
Yes, you did. I'm in that space now, because I'm finding myself. I come from a family of 12. It's 10 of us now. And I've always been that person that, because I'm the second oldest, and I used to be the fourth, but now I'm the second oldest. And I've always had that leadership role in the family. And it's come to a place where I don't want to have that leadership role anymore. I think it's, even though I love my family, I love my siblings, but it's come to a place where it's taking from me, you know? I don't know if anyone can understand that, but I'm caring for them, even though they have their own families now. And it's to a place now that I don't want to do that anymore. I just want to kind of have that space for myself. And maybe that mask is different, but I do know this: once you start knowing who you are, people respond to that, because I know now my family is saying, "Well, where is Peggy? Peggy remembers everything. You know, she remembers the birthdays." And it was just like that light bulb moment that came on. It's almost like they predict what you're going to do. And I had to find myself, I kind of had to take that mask off. No, this is not who I am anymore. I'm in a different space, and that space is not to say just me alone, but now it's time for me to care for me,
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's the part of unmasking that I'm at.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that. Absolutely. It looks different, but it's the same thing. You are doing your work of looking at yourself and defining how you want to show up, not in the way that others want you to. There are two books that come to mind here that I wanted to reference. One is The Anatomy of Peace. And in one of the concepts in that book is this, it has these 4 boxes in it. And the one box that I wanted to bring up is, it's called the must be seen as box, where others define for you how you should be, how you should show up, all of those stuff. And that you need to actually free yourself out of from that box. And one little book that helped me with that was the book that is called The Power of People, where the author uses mathematical symbols, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and says each one of us needs to get to this point where we begin to turn down the volume on subtractors and dividers and invite adders and multipliers into our lives. The people that create this nurturing and supportive space that helps you become more of you rather than less. The other ones take away from you, like they steal from you, they break you down. So be intentional about surrounding yourself with multipliers and adders. The people that cheer you on, source for you, hold you up and make you think and feel you are the best thing that ever showed up on the planet. Other questions?
Okakan, can you repeat the name of that book you just mentioned?
The Power of People.
Okay, I'll put it in chat.
Dr. Verna, Verna Price. Verna Price.
Thank you. What I'm struck with as I'm listening to you, Okakan, is this, we've been called as coaches into this space where, like you said, we have to do our own inner work. We have to be a good instrument of self. We can't do for others what we haven't done for self. And you've used a lot of really good language to remind us as coaches that we have to keep our instruments clean and do our own inner work.
That's exactly it. Clean, tuned, whichever instrument you have. Without that, the show can't happen. It just cannot. So yeah, absolutely. Does anybody have like a response? Other responses? Thanks, Carrie, for that. Oh.
I'd like to say something. Hi, Okakan.
Hi, Hillary.
Hi. First, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing such a profoundly personal and just really deeply moving experience with us. And my question is really just around, like, as coaches, how we're encountering our own shadow and that of our client, and how frequently we don't actually know, like, how language is going to land, or like what associations a person might have with particular words that we're using. And this could just like come out in our everyday, interactions. It doesn't necessarily need to be a coaching client relationship. But I'm curious, like, in your training at the Process Institute, was there any work done around shaming and how, like, our culture just particularly is so embedded with sort of this shame blame kind of paradigm? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was, and I'm sure you all have different options for where you go or what you access, to deal with a lot of those things that you are referencing, Hillary. And for those of you that have done the PQ work, you know, or have explored that part, which is the Shizat Shaman's work that he has done, you know, he goes from talking about the saboteurs and then also talks about the sage. And so there are different ways of like investigating and getting at the root of the things that scream at us, whether it is systemic and societal or some personal, family of origin kinds of issues that create the same kinds of obstacles. Part of what I also heard you say is that sometimes our clients or our friends or other people in our lives trigger those in us, you know? And so we have to be kind of like mindful of when that happens. There are times I don't have the answers myself, which is what I was referencing earlier about the shepherd needing a shepherd. In the last 23 years, to be very precise, I have always had either one or a combination of a spiritual guide, a coach, and supervisor, sometimes all three. Mm-hmm. But at the very least, one of those in the last 23 years of my life, because I need a space where someone holds the container and helps me look at whatever the tension is, like what you were describing, Larry, so that I'm not swallowed up by it. And I can unpack it and learn from it and step back into the same world again and keep coming back out for support and places for reflection.
Naomi, I know you had your hand up earlier.
Hey, hi, Oka-Khan. So beautiful to
Hi,
see
Naomi.
your story. Yeah. You know, what strikes me in hearing your story and kind of in my own story is how oppression has kind of, it's dehumanized people. And the fact that only some people hold knowledge, or some people can create knowledge, or some people have power. And, you know, your unmasking to me represents a very strong stand against that oppression, and really in your own way taking back the power that you have simply because you are a human being on this earth, and you know, coming from such beautiful people. The other thing that strikes me too, connecting to a comment made earlier, is, you know, as I have gone through my own process and will always be going through it, I find that my clients are able to start to go through their process, meaning it may feel safer for them to begin to say these things, to unmask themselves. And they don't do that in other spaces. And so no matter who we are and what masks we're wearing, I think just this power of unmasking is a releasing for others too. So
thank you so much. Yeah, thanks, Naomi. Thanks for that. So yeah, I think as you live here, you know, I hope that you don't turn it over to someone else to tell you who you are, whether you belong or not, if you can do it or not, that you actually claim it and own it. I mean, that's ultimately what it is, because no one will give you all of what you need to fully come home to yourself. No one will. So thank you for being here, and let's stay in touch in that bigger space where we are all exploring and seeking and doing the work that we need to do. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you so much, Oka-Khan, and thank you everybody for your time today.
You're most welcome.